What does your portfolio even look like today?
So mine's a tiny portfolio, but it's still something. So I'm really proud of it. I have a two family in Boston, and it's like a really upcoming location now. I remember people talked about properties here being like 100, 200,000, right? For like, or maybe 300,000 for like a triple decker. Now you're looking at least $1 million. And that was, I don't know, maybe like 20 years ago. So it's just to show the value of it. And I remember people, when they hear of like Dorchester, Boston, around that area specifically, it just, people shy away from it right away just because of, I think at the time there might have been like a lot of immigrants coming in. And so again, it just, same thing with that, where people just associate that with crime, bad things. But now it's up and coming. It's like you can barely afford living here. The properties here are appreciating a lot. So I'm like, well, that's good for my portfolio there. And I have another one over in Milton. I think it was a two family and they sort of like converted to attic, like a third unit. And so I'm like, man, I can find like basically like a three family in a very nice neighborhood. Like I'm all for this. So I just know that it would be easy to rent out. I'm like, I would live there if I was a tenant type of thing.
Can you share some numbers from one of your deals that you did, then what you buy it for and what you're renting it for?
Just to give some context, like the Milton one, because that's more recent. So I bought the property for 800,000, and so it's a three family, right? And so when you look at the going rate for rental here, you're looking at least maybe, I'll go very conservatively, so like 2,500 per unit. Let's just go with that. My PITI, I think for the mortgage itself was, let's go with 5,000 ish. So right there, you can see that there's a margin there. When I just found out that it was a multifamily in Milton, I'm like, that's fine right there. But I think just running the numbers, just knowing sort of like the market rate of where you are and figure out if it makes sense, right? I think now might be a little bit tricky just because of the interest rate, but I got it right during COVID. So my interest rate was like a steal.
You bought this property, it was $2,500 at the time. Like, has it gone up since then, Lily?
Oh, yeah. No, we're looking at like
Ooh.
1,000.
Say it again, how much now? Welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, today I found a gem for all of you. I am bringing on Lilly Duong. She's a friend of a friend, and when I first got to meet her, I was like super stunned that she knew the same people that we knew when growing up, and she's an investor. She also invests in affordable housing. So I was like, wow, what were the chances that I would run into someone right here in Montana, of all the places, with someone back home in Boston that's also doing affordable housing? And once she started telling me the stories about how amazing her Section 8 tenants were and how responsible they were, I knew right away I had to bring on to the podcast because, as the audience know, right, if you've been following this podcast for a while, one of the biggest myths that we want to bust is this myth associated with Section 8. That's all guns, drugs, and drama, when in reality, it's just hardworking folks like our parents who worked really hard to put food on the table and truly treasured and valued the home and a roof that was over their head. So today, I'm super excited for Lilly Duong to come onto the podcast. Lilly, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Kent.
I'm serious. I was jazzed. I've been trying to book you. Guys, she's a celebrity. She is so busy. I've been spending weeks and weeks trying to book her and to get her come to the podcast, but I finally got her. And now here she is. Lilly, for people that don't really know much about you, who are you and how did you even get into real estate?
Yeah, no. So my name is Lilly. I was born and raised in Boston, Mass. Real estate was just, I think I've always known that that was like the avenue for financial freedom, right? And I look at it and I always tell people, I'm like, if anything, worst case scenario, it's my 401k at the end of the day, right? It's something that we know just appreciate versus, I think, what was it yesterday that the market sort of semi-crashed?
Oh, yeah.
2 days ago. And so it's just, I think it's just seeing the value of a home, right? In general, when you grow up and you can just see like rent's always going up, the price of the property is always going up. So it's just like consistent there versus putting your money somewhere and it's just, I don't know, you're literally just having corporations control this and someone else that's just controlling that versus something that's tangible that you can do it. And so I think growing up with immigrants' parents too, that was one of the things that they sort of like embed into you where it's just like, I don't know, go to school, get a good job, own a house, make sure that it's your house. Because I think when they came here, we hear about parents who've been here and they're like, yeah, I came here with $200 in the bank. I don't have a house. They literally did like a pad split, right? Where it's just, they're like, yeah, I moved here and I live with like 5 other people and like 5 different bedrooms type of thing. And so it was just one of those things where you just know early on when we were kids are just like one of the things that to them define success is just like owning a home. And then I think sort of like based on seeing what other successful people do, part of it is owning properties and how to, that's like one of their outlet and ways of achieving the financial freedom that way.
And I really love how you anchored and you took your parents' version of owning a home, right? But then you also anchored around where people are commonly associated with retirement, right? The 401k, and you anchored that really well. But in this scenario, you're in control of that asset instead of just some company taking 5-6% of your paycheck every single 2 weeks, putting it into a Wall Street bank, and then they kind of disperse it into their own funds. Now you're in control. So seeing that you're in control, Lily, what does your portfolio even look like today? Can you tell the audience a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so mine's a tiny portfolio compared to most, but it's still something. So I'm really proud of it. I have a two-family in Boston, which is kind of not disclose too much of the property address here in Boston. And it's like a really upcoming location now. I remember people talked about properties here being like 100, 200,000, right? For like, or maybe 300,000 for like a triple decker. Now you're looking at least $1 million. And that was, I don't know, maybe like 20 years ago. So it's just to show the value of it. And I, even in Boston, Dorchester-ish, around that area, it's just very, we talked about like all the crime rate, right? And it's just being like a terrible place to be. I remember people were always, when they hear of like Dorchester, Boston, around that area specifically, it just, people shy away from it right away just because of, I think at the time there might have been like a lot of immigrants coming in. And so again, it just, same thing with that, where people just associate that with crime, bad things. But now it's up and coming. It's like you can barely afford living here type of thing. So I'm just like, woo, like the properties here are appreciating a lot. So I'm like, well, that's good for my portfolio there. And I have another one over in Milton in Mass. So it's like, right, I think it's like it's like a neighbor town, kind of like, it is a really more, I would say more prestigious than Dorchester, but just knowingly, like, I just know that because I've lived here my entire life, I just know that it's a sought out area. So then I was just like, well, especially finding a multifamily there. So that's, I think it was a 2-family and they sort of like converted to attic, like a third unit. And so I'm like, man, I can find like a trip, basically like a 3-family in a very nice neighborhood. Like I'm all for this, right? And so I just know that it would be easy to rent out. I'm like, I would live there if I was a tenant type of thing. Like I would totally, and I did live there for a little bit. I did a little bit of a house hacking there.
I love that. And maybe I can just peel back a few things, right? So
Sure.
you got your homes, and I really want to point out to people that you mentioned Dorchester, one of the areas in Boston or part of Boston. And sometimes it was known as a crime-ridden area in certain pockets, right? And I think that's true for every major city.
Yeah.
But we got to see the gentrification really happen, and the property prices, as you said, has gone up tremendously. And then you're in Milton, Massachusetts, another great upscale neighborhood, but you also were able to house hack and develop your own path for owning real estate in that area. So can you share some numbers associated? Because like this sounds like great and all, but can you help make it a little bit more concrete? Can you share some numbers from one of your deals that you did, and what you buy it for and what you're renting it for?
Yeah. So just to give some context, like the Milton one, because that's more recent. So I bought the property for 800,000. I know, it's crazy. And so it's a 3-family, right? And so when you look at the going rate for rental here, you're looking at least, I mean, I think at that time, maybe I'll go very conservatively. So like 2,500, right? And so that's 2,500 per unit. Let's just go with that. My PITI, I think for the mortgage itself was, let's go with 5,000-ish. So right there, you can see that there's a margin there. And I think prior to even the property right away, when I just found out that it was a multifamily in Milton, I'm like, that's mine right there. But I think just running the numbers, just knowing sort of like the market rate of where you are and figure out if it makes sense, right? I think now might be a little bit tricky just because of the interest rate, but I got it right during COVID. So my interest rate was like a steal. But I just knew like from experience too, and I think there's a reason why I'm here, right? With Section 8, it's just knowing that there's guaranteed income that comes in. They have the set pricing. And so when we talked about the guaranteed 401k, just like security, this is like, for me, like having affordable housing in that sense, it's like the least riskiest in that sense of like income. some people might even say you can make more money doing like short-term rental or whatever, but it's just more management. So for me, it's just like Section 8 is just great because I love that while there are some nuances that you have to navigate through at first, but for me, it's like no brainer if you just want to like park your money there and do the least amount of work in a sense of like not having to deal with like Airbnb, cleanup and everything in that sense. And that's definitely the way to go, where you're still making money and you're obviously your property's appreciating. And if there's additional income or like cash flow, it's great.
I love that you bought the home for 800 grand. Because sometimes when people think about Section 8, I want to point this out, people will be like, oh, so these are like really cheap homes, like 50 grand, 60 grand. But here you have Lilly, who bought a $800,000 home in a really nice neighborhood, and she's getting about $2,500 a month, and this is guaranteed rent. Now, again, this is not investment advice. We're not soliciting any investments on this call, but on a risk-adjusted basis, you have to think about it, right? If you're a real estate investor and you are after cash flow, but then a lot of real estate investors in this world are after financial freedom, free time, do whatever you want. And if you go into the Airbnb world, well, it's more active. You got to be constantly messaging with guests, right? So you have to pick and choose what strategy makes sense for you. And obviously, our podcast is on affordable housing, so we might be a little bit biased here. But personally, I have some Airbnbs, but this is why we love the strategy, because on a risk-adjusted basis, that there's a portion of the rent every single month that's going to be paid on time by the government, direct deposit right into your bank account, so that you don't really have to worry about it, right? Even if the tenant doesn't pay their portion, that portion by the government is going to be paid on time every single month. Now, you bought this property, it was $2,500 at the time. Like, has it gone up since then, Lily?
Oh yeah, no, we're looking at like 3,000. Like,
wait, say it again. How much now?
3,000 a unit at least minimum.
3,000 a unit, and your PITI stayed the same, right?
Yeah.
About 5,000-ish.
Right.
Talk about, guys,
Yeah.
talk about a spread. So that's a huge spread in an area where I'm assuming Milton's a pretty high appreciating market. What are your thoughts there?
It's not appreciating as much as Boston for sure, but it still is. And when we're just talking about this, I remembered of COVID, right? And I think during that time, I remember when it comes to like job loss and that really trickled down to rent, right? Where people were losing their job and then they can't pay rent, but literally because of Section 8, I was like, man, I have never been more grateful to have this, because I knew like that was, again, guaranteed income. And if anything, there were programs out there that helped the landlord and everything too. So that was like amazing, where I just knew in that sense where I was so grateful to have affordable Section 8, where it's just guaranteed and I didn't have to worry about my mortgage or like maybe my tenants not being able to afford their side of the rent. So that was like, while I know other people struggled a lot in that during that time, especially, I would say that was like the pivotal moment where it's like, if you weren't sold on Section 8, you should be.
And I think that's such a great point for everybody to have, right? When we're hearing as landlords during the eviction moratorium, right, where you can't evict people even when they're not paying rents. Guess what? Landlords like Lilly still got their rents on time every single month. That's why on a risk-adjusted basis, if you think there's going to be another pandemic happening, guess who's going to get the rent still? Someone like Lilly. And this is why you guys got to follow Lilly for sure. So let's kind of wrap up this case study, right? You bought it for about 800 grand. You're renting out for $3,000-ish a month per unit now. PITI is 5,000. What do you think it's worth today? And what have you spent on maintenance on it so far?
So I spent about 50,000, I'd say, on the second unit. When we first purchased it, that one definitely needs some TLC for you'd have to like upkeep it to the market too, right? You can't charge $3,000 and having the property looking like it's back in the 70s or something. And so keep up with the paint, this and that. I think we did have to renovate the bathroom, the kitchen, not so much. Like that was not too bad, but we did have to put about 50,000 in there just to fix that. And then obviously even the outside, the exterior here and there, just because with Section 8 too, a part of it is like they do assess the property. So you can't just go in and charge market price or like at the cap of where they would allow you to do it while having outdated things in the house. Like if you don't have a dishwasher, you don't have anything, and they're like, okay, we don't. And it's more appealing, right? Because at the end of the day too, like you want it to be enjoyable. Like I think it's sort of, we talk about who we'd like to attract to at the same time. And so it's like, well, if I have a not so nice apartment, I can't expect a really nice tenant to show up and live there at the same time, right? And so it's like, okay, I'd like to set the expectation right there where it's a nice apartment. Therefore, I'd like to get someone in that would be respectful of it too, because if it's nice, ideally they would treat it, they would just treat it in a more respectful way living there.
Right, because when they have pride and dignity, right, they take care of everything. I can't tell you how many times my parents, when they lived in their apartment, they took care of all the little things.
Mhm.
They took care of it. They didn't want to be a bother, is what they said to me. We don't want to bother people to handle this light bulb. When you have other tenants that might call you for every single light bulb change, right? That happens all the time. So,
yeah.
I mean, if you had to guess, like, how much do you think your property is worth today on the market? I won't hold you to it, but just curious.
I'm like, from Zillow?
Yeah, that could work too. What do you?
I mean, I know. I'm like, they haven't seen the inside, but it's pretty updated. So I think it's a pretty good estimate. But I think right now they're going for like $1 million right now, at least.
Wow, guys,
For 4
check
years?
that out.
Yeah.
In 4 years, she made about 200 grand in appreciation. So she's still making cash flow, and she's guaranteed rent every single month. This is an amazing strategy, but there's always a good and a bad, right? So what kind of myths have you heard about Section 8 in the past? Because I really want to help debunk those based on your experience. So let's just start with the baseline. What do you hear about Section 8 sometimes, and what's been your experience in reality?
Hearing wise, I think it's just, and even the misconception, this is like, I think it's just people think that obviously with Section 8, right? It's like you're looking at poor people. And when you think of like poor people, then you think of like, oh, I don't know, they're criminals. They don't take care of your property. They're just this and that. And so they're not like the ideal tenant at the end of the day. But just like you, my parents, and I know even my friends' family, they've all at one point, we have to start somewhere, right? And so being on Section 8, I'm like, so I think, and that's why, like, for me, maybe I am a little bit biased because then I see other people where I'm like, man, they're treating their property really well. Same thing, right? Where I remember they would buy their own lawnmower. They're like snowblower. I'm like, really? And then as the landlord, I'm like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to do that. But it's just so crazy that, and I think that really helped a lot, at least for me demystifying the whole, like the misconception of Section 8, because I actually do see the other side of it where people are taking care of the property. They're just such good tenants. And then because other people experience it too, right? And so you hear things, you're like, yeah, but they're criminals. Oh, they're taking advantage of the system. They're just, you never know. They don't have a job. So how, like, they're just bad things about it. But then it's true, I'm sure, right? Like people don't just make these things up. But at the same time, that's just employment. That's friends. That's anyone. You come and you'll find bad people. You'll find good people. You'll have good seed, bad seeds. And so it's just like making sure that you shouldn't let that, I don't know, one bad seed ruin everything. It's just making sure that you set a system in place, whatever it is, whether it's the interview process, right? And that goes the same thing with like employees. It's just, you just have to do a better job vetting out people. That doesn't always necessarily mean that you'll get lucky every time, because you never know. It's just one of those things where you don't know until you get into it, but then you get smarter, you learn from your lesson, and there's a takeaway from it. It's just one of those, unfortunately, I don't want to say pain point, but it kind of is. But it's like, I think about my mom telling me, she was just like, well, Lily, earning money, making money isn't easy. Like it doesn't fall off the tree. So even if you're a landlord, you still have to put the work in it. If you want to make the least amount of money, then yeah, maybe just put it in like a Roth IRA and just let it sit there for a while. You don't have to do anything, versus when you're trying to win on the appreciation, the cash flow, this and that, like there are some work to it, and you might not always be lucky and get 100% all of your tenant being good. But if it's 90% or whatever it is, that's a win.
I completely agree with that. And I want to stress to the point that, well, first of all, Lily, for you to attract the tenants that are so willing, did I hear that right? Like they bought their own I know it wasn't at your direction,
No,
but
not on my property,
they bought their own lawnmower and they bought their own snowblower to take care of the home.
Yes.
Like, guys, think about that. That's how much pride these folks have in the unit that Lily has provided to them. I'm sure if Lily didn't spend 50 grand on that unit, that they might not have the same pride. But now all of a sudden, when you give people a home to live in where they can have dignity and pride in where they live, now all of a sudden you're attracting the best of the best tenants. Mm-hmm. And isn't that true for wherever you go? Sometimes we always talk about, hey, pay for quality, right? You don't want to do it over and over again and never learn from your mistakes. When you put together a great product, great home, you attract the right people. And that's exactly what Lily has done. And that's why she's able to bust through these myths. If she gave a home with full of rats and cockroaches, do you think someone might say, oh, yeah, let me go spruce up the place with a snowblower myself, right? Because they might not reciprocate in that scenario. So you have to think about what type of product you're putting forward and what type of landlord you're going to put forward. And I love your message about how you got to screen the tenants, right? You got to have that process. You got to be active in it. We have this myth in real estate where, oh, you just buy a property, you rent it out, and that's it. You sit back and collect the cash. That's usually not how it works in a lot of things in life. And there's always going to be a problem that you're going to have to solve to earn your return on your capital or your time or your energy. That goes for real estate as well. So, well, any other good stories that you can tell us about how amazing your tenants are? Because I really want to some great stories.
I will. I'm like, they're just amazing. It doesn't help that I send them a gift for Christmas right now. Just kidding. It's so when I first started out, I remember for my second floor tenant, it was empty. And so she was great. She seemed great at the time, like emails, good morning, this very proper, had a job at a very stable, like government job. And I'm like, oh, like she seems good. Everything seems fine, took her in. And then literally I found out that she decided to pay whenever she wants to within the month. That was sort of the guideline. And she sort of like pushed back on me being a new or like a younger person where she's like, I've never had this issue where a landlord is chasing me for payments. Mind you, she's paying like the third week of the month. I'm like, lady, I still have to pay for my mortgage at least. So after that, like it took a while. I think I will say is when you get into like Section 8 affordable housing, like you do have to do a little bit more research, right? It's not like somewhere where I can just rent it out to like some college kids and it's just like, oh yeah, here's a lease, this is this and whatever. This is like there are some rules and regulation that you do have to know. Things like if you want to increase the rent, things of that nature, like you do have to follow some sort of protocol versus like when you don't have to go through this. But my takeaway from that was I actually didn't even finish my 1-year lease with her. We mutually sort of like broke up because she was unhappy, I was unhappy. And the takeaway from that I learned afterward was like, I was like, credit score is so important to me. And while I know that people in these type of scenarios, sometimes they're starting out. And so they might not even have a good credit score and it's okay. But just again, almost like setting like a SOP where it's just like, okay, you sort of like figure out what's your happy medium of a credit score for someone that's typically in these type of situation. And it could be because maybe they're like a stay-at-home mom and they don't have anything to go off by. And so I remember doing sort of like a guideline after that tenant. I was like, okay, we definitely have to do something with the credit score. So I remember even one of them where I'm like, okay, if there's a scenario where this person doesn't even have a credit score at all, like what do I do? And so then I was like, okay, let's do something similar to like when we apply for loans and you would have to do like a cosigner, but just keeping that like account, like holding someone accountable, just because like that was my learning lesson where I was like, oh my goodness. Every time when it was coming up to the first, I was just dreading so much as a landlord. I'm like, I have to chase for money. Like the stipend from the government, great. But the other one was it varies based on like people's income. And so hers was a good chunk of it too. It wasn't like $100 and I can just like not have to worry about it until the 31st of the month. This is like a good, decent amount where it would be helpful to have in there.
It's just for the audience that don't know what you're talking about, right?
Okay.
When you talk about the tenant portion and the government portion, right? What does that mean exactly? Let's say your rent was $3,000. How does the government decide how much they want to pay?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not an expert, at least, like, I don't know how they determine and like, I'm sure they have like a little spreadsheet of how it works, but essentially it's just like, it's income adjustable type of thing. So it's just like, if you make maybe 80% of X amount of their qualifying amount, then you would have to bring an X amount to it. So while the landlord still get $3,000, say for the rent, that was the approved amount. If they don't, for whatever reason, if they don't have any income whatsoever, then the government would pay 100%. And their portion would be 0. And then based on like how much they make, then the needle moves a little bit. So like the government might maybe compensate for 80% and then they would do 20%. And that's really between them. The government would just like the the housing authority, they'll send you a letter and they'll like outline everything. They're like, hey, this is the amount that we're paying. This is the amount that you can expect from your tenant type of thing.
Yeah, I love that explanation because I think for every tenant it's going to be different.
Mhm.
But for the audience listening, just understand that there is a government resource out there that kind of spells it out in black and white what
Mhm.
exactly you're going to get from the government and what exactly you're going to get from the tenant because it's going to be dependent on how much the tenant makes, right? If your tenant's on Social Security and they get a inflation adjusted raise every single year, right? That rent amount is going to change because their income might go up. But
Mhm.
similarly, the government's portion of the rent might go up because your total rent is going up. So just be very mindful of that for all of you listening, that every single tenant is responsible for a portion of the rent if they're making income, right? Obviously, they're going to take into factors such as medical expenses or what they're
Dependent.
paying for utilities, right? All this stuff all matters. So just be really, really mindful of that, as Lily said. So look, I like that you shared a story of how it's just not all unicorns and rainbows, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes there are problems that we're going to face. But I'm hoping what Lily just did was show you all, hey, this was a problem I had with a tenant, and this is how I dealt with it, and this is how it ended. Now, could they all be amicable like the one that Lily had, and then she just had to kind of go off and find a tenant? Yeah, it could be. And if not, then all of a sudden you had to start working with the housing authorities and talking through about the situation. Because remember, there is another party that's holding it accountable. And I like how Lily updated her standard operating procedures afterwards, right? Because she still has to meet fair housing laws. She still has to stay consistent with her criteria on how she's screening tenants. But she took a lesson from what she learned from prior experience and applied it towards the future so she can get better at it. That's just like what you do in life in general. So sometimes everybody will say, oh, I'll do this if I know exactly what every single scenario is going to happen. And this is exactly how I'm going to handle every scenario. Well, that's why we have this podcast, but there's no way you're going to have 100% of all the wrongs or the situations that might occur. And Lily just showed you how she was brave enough to still take a chance. And when that problem came up, she solved the problem. So Lily, I really love how you handle that.
Well, thank you. I tried. I'm trying my best. But you're right. It's always different. You just don't know at the end of the day. I remember even like screening for tenants, right? It's like you have to be patient. I think that was another thing that I learned. Sort of like don't, I don't know, propose to the first girl you dated type of thing. And that was it's almost like one of those things where you have to like take a step back and reassess the situation. You're like, okay, what went wrong? How can I make this better? Because it's one of those things where it could wear you out if you just don't learn from it. And then now I'm just going to have another tenant because of it's really at the end of the day, it comes back to me because I didn't do a good job, sort of, I don't know, just having a good standard procedure on how to bring in new tenants. It's just like I could be lazy and literally the first person I see down the street type of thing, the first application, I could just send them in. But then that's literally where the problem would come in, right? So it's just like making sure that they check all the boxes of what you're looking for too. At the end of the day, I mean, can't be too picky, but some people I know, like in this scenario too, my tenant downstairs. So she was someone that I inherited, and I count my blessing every day because she is literally the best tenant ever. And it's crazy to the point where she's so good that like I told her, I was like, one of the other things that we need to also address too is like I think with Section 8, it's like a dependence, right? Like how many people that live with you. And so that's how many bedroom they're allowed and whatnot. So my tenant on the first floor, her nephew, he graduated from college. So he doesn't live there anymore. So her rent actually went like the amount that she can afford or the government is willing to give her is actually a little bit less than what it used to be because it went from basically a two-person household to one. But she's so good that I was willing to take the price cut because I'm like, I don't even want to just date around because she's literally the best tenant out there. So I'm willing to just take a little bit of a pay cut, but like a little bit of a rent cut from her, just knowingly that she's such a good Section 8 tenant.
And this is why I like that you are in control of your business. So the other side of the equation, right, guys, for you all that are listening, you can decide, hey, I'm not maxing out my rents anymore. Let me get this person out so I can put in another person.
Yeah.
But people always forget you got to turn over the unit. You're going to have some vacancy. And then you got to think about what's the overall cost of switching tenants. And in this scenario, Lily made the choice of I have a great tenant and they're still paying on time. And I don't want to go through all the extra headache because people sometimes discount the toll it takes on you for the time and energy to want to screen out a tenant, to manage a rehab. And that's an opportunity cost because you might be going out there and look at another deal. Let's say lock in another deal for 800 grand, making 200 grand in appreciation in 2 years, right? Think about the energy that you'd expend. So be really, really wise with how you spend that time and energy. And Lily, you said this is such a great tenant. Do you have one more story of how great some of your tenants are? I really want to hammer it home for people.
Oh, well, I know. So the tenant, one of my other tenant, the one in Boston, I'm like, she gave me a chili pepper plant that this is so funny. I'm like, this is my tenant. So she planted the seed and everything. She's growing it out and she's watering my chili pepper plant. But she's so good. Like, she's one of those tenants where if there's like a party or something and there's like a surplus of food, right? Because it's a house party, she'll bring them to me. Like, this is my tenant. They're like, hey, I have extra, I don't know, fried rice and this and that. I'll bring it to you. And so it's almost like, this is like my golden rule where it's just like treat people the way you'd like to be treated. And it just comes around. And so like, I love all of my tenants. I don't need to give them, like, I don't need to send them a birthday gift or like a Christmas gift, but I want to show my appreciation to them because they're so good to me in a sense. Like, they give me a peace of mind. I value that a lot, right? We talked about time, money, effort. And so that was one of the things where it's just like my tenants being good to me. It's like just being self-efficient in a way, right? And I get it. Sometimes light bulb issues, and I'll bring this up with my light fixture here. My friends are like, well, Lily, what are some of the things that are so bad about your tenants, right? And I'm like, well, one of them asked me to change the light. Her light bulb went out. But then I have to like put myself in her position. I was like, prior to being a landlord, I would have literally grabbed that like light fixture and I would have like twist the whole thing. I wouldn't know how to use it. And so like actually all of my tenants are ladies. And so I have to factor that in, right? Where it's like, it's a little bit different. It's just female sometimes. And I get it. I know. It's just sometimes they're busy doing other things. And for me too, I look at it as they're being respectful. They're just like, I can try to fix that too at the same time, but what if I break it? And I don't want to break your household too. So let me just at least call my landlord and ask her to help. But for me, I'm like, if that's what they're asking for me to like help out and fix, that's the best thing ever. I've heard different horror stories. I don't know. We're not going to talk about that. But I think it's just like, sometimes you just like my other tenant, right? Where she's not paying and it's something super minor in a sense. It's not like she's beating me up and it's noise complaint or anything. It's just the fact that she's not paying on time. And that alone it's like its own agony and stress itself that I have to deal with. Literally every time when the bill comes, I'm just like, great, I have to go and chase after this tenant. So for all my other tenants who are paying on time, and literally for me, it's like most of the time when they're talking to me, it's like saying hi. It's not like a complaint. It's not like, oh, hey, I'm going to have to pay you in 2 weeks because I don't know, I lost my money at Encore or something. And so for me, that's a peace of mind. And so I will take that. And that's why I'm like, I appreciate you for being the best tenant ever, which means I have a peace of mind. And you can't really put a price on that. So I'm like, what? Here's a Christmas gift. Here's a birthday gift. Thank you for being my tenant. And we're just going to go on with our relationship this way.
Oh, Lily, these are such good stories. And I love how you have such great perspective on all of this because you showed people, hey, sometimes you give and take, but I think the level of discretionary effort that you have shown to your tenants is absolutely beautiful. I think this is the model that a lot of people should really look at. And they should follow you because not everybody has to send a Christmas gift to their tenants. But because of the friendship and relationship you built with your tenants, they have reciprocated. They look after you. They look after your property. And guys, like, what better strategy in real estate than to truly understand that you have a profound impact on their lives and they want to be friends with you? Like, we can't bring money to the graves. The only thing we're going to leave behind is how we made people feel when they're on this planet, when we were near them. So why not be the best version of yourself? And Lily, I can't thank you enough because without people like you, I would have never had the home I grew up in. And for that, I really, really just want to thank you because we need more people with a great heart like yours, a big heart that's willing and truly cares about their tenants. And I'm so grateful to have you as a friend. I'm so grateful to bring you on to the podcast. I knew you were a little nervous, but you have just crushed this podcast so far. Okay. And I want to see you win, Lily. I really do. So I know you're in real estate and you have another business. So let's talk about that. What are you doing right now in real estate?
Yeah, so I'm a transaction coordinator for investors, creative transaction typically. So not your typical what you think of like on market deals, right? With agents. These are like off market. People are sellers are typically in a pain point because maybe they just bought their house a year ago and property hasn't appreciated enough. And just with the cost of selling the property itself, when you're paying out to the agents, this and that, closing costs, you're literally walking away. Sometimes, most of the time, these people sold their property on the market. They would have to cut a paycheck to pay it out, to sell their own property, which is crazy. And so the investor that I work with, they're helping these sellers out by purchasing the property in a creative way. So my role in it is, once they secured the contract, right, where both parties are ready to basically move forward with the sale of the property, that's where I come in and I take that. This is like time and money, right? And so I basically take that off their plate. Now the investor gets to whatever that they need to do, whether it's to procure another property or to do assessment on that own property, right? I don't know what it is. Like, they need to bring in private money lender, or maybe they just need to start figuring out like places to piece together on their end to make sure that no time is being wasted. So that's where I come in and my team. So we're transaction coordinators. We open escrow. We are basically like the hub of communication to different type of parties. When you're in these type of transaction, you have the seller, you have your investor. Maybe you do have a real estate agent. You might have a property manager. You'll have either a closing attorney or an escrow agent from title. And so just like basically communicating and making sure that everyone's on the same page, all the things are being done properly. We pull title to make sure that it is a clean property, nothing came up type of thing, getting all the paperwork signed. Typically, the reason why we're in the picture is just to move things along. I think some of like the analogies that we've heard a lot is like we're like the lunch monitor, the mom or something, where we're just moving everything along, making sure that keeping tabs on things to make sure that it's moving in a timely manner so that we can close typically for 30 days, right? For when the property's closed. That way, there are different forms that people have to complete. And so we're literally the pesky person that's like bugging everyone. It's like, oh, hey, Kent, did you do this yet? Hey, Kent, are you ready for this and that? And so just keeping people on track to do things. And that's our task.
And I love that responsibility. And I think it's so crucial that people understand it, right? We hear about creative finance transactions all the time, right? If you have been following my YouTube channel, we underwrite on-market deals, we underwrite off-market deals, subject to transactions where you're buying a property, subject to the existing financing, because you're taking over payments on those loans, right? Then there's seller financing pieces of these deals, right? Very creative financing structures that a regular real estate agent might not be necessarily aware of. So Lily's team is where the rubber meets the road. Like, she actually makes sure that the transaction actually happens, and she stays on top of everyone to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. That is someone you want on your team, because I don't know, for some of you visionaries out there that might be just running off to the next deal. Well, just because you locked up a deal doesn't mean it's going to close. You got to see it through, and you need someone like Lilly on your team to see it through. So make sure you follow Lilly. Well, we keep talking about creative finance deals. Like, do you have a story of what a creative finance deal even is? You have a story you can share?
Yeah, so I acquired one, and this is kind of cool, where sitting in where I sit now, I get to see, like, I build a lot of relationship, right, with different parties, but I also see transaction that goes through. So maybe it could be a contract that comes in and the investor is like, yeah, you know what, I don't really have an end buyer, someone to sort of like sell this contract to. And that was sort of where it came from. Saw a contract, saw the property, it was in Mass, and I'm like, I want this. So then I end up being the transaction coordinator doing this, but I also was the end buyer for this too. This property was in similar scenario that I talked to you about, where they purchased a property maybe a couple years ago, and to put it on the market, it wasn't very advantageous for them. And so someone else reach out to them to basically acquire this property. And so I was just taking over the mortgage at the end of the day. They were walking away with some cash at the end at closing. So I think I paid like maybe, I forgot, it was like $30,000 at closing to them. And then I took over their mortgage. And so here we are. I'm still paying off their mortgage. The house is mine. And I think one of the things that people ask a lot is just like, my mom including, she's like, Lilly, are you sure this is legal? Are you sure you guys did this right? Is there any chance that they're going to take the house back? And I was like, well, Mom, the house is under my name. It's just the loan is under someone else's name. But she is protected because there is a promissory note. There is a deed of trust, which is being recorded on the property. So at any time, if I get abducted by alien, or if I just decide to, I don't know, I got I get hit by the bus or something. And then if there's no plan in place whatsoever, that is literally how they're protected. So a lot of the times too, by having a transaction coordinator and just they're sort of like their ethics is higher too. And sometimes they know what's like the latest and greatest based on training. So the top tier TC, essentially, they will teach us all the nuances, everything that they experience, all the things that we need to do to make sure not only are we protecting the investor, but we're protecting the sellers too. Protecting the seller in a sense where if anything were to happen, they have the instrument and they have a way to remedy this. And basically, we don't want to put them in the same position that they were in before. But protecting the investor too, it's just, we're just doing business in good faith at the end of the day, right? Where we're like, hey, we're providing you these instruments. In case if we don't, for whatever reason, don't pay you, you can literally, this is how you can protect us. And so that's why I'm going on a tangent, but I'm like, if I ever have to work with someone, they're like, we don't want that type of protection for the seller. I'm like, I can't work with you. This is insane. Like, I want to make sure that we're all doing good business at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. And I can't stress enough how fair you are, right? Because you look out for both sides on a transaction. You don't want it to be overly favored to one side because then it doesn't seem fair. And that also creates animosity. It creates additional risk for the transaction falling through. So again, right, if you guys are working on a creative finance deals, right, and you are trying to figure it all out on your own, you don't need to figure it out on your own. You can have someone like Lilly on your team who can guide you through the process, ensure that you have the right protections in place, and on top of that, help you get through all the nitty gritty paperwork that's associated with these transactions, because that's really what protects all of the parties in a transaction. So, Lilly, if people want to find out more about you and your business, where can they find out more about you?
They can find me on Instagram. It's Lilly, Lilyyy, and then I have an underscore, and it's just my last name, Duong.
All right. Make sure you guys follow her. And oh, Lilly, this is one question I ask everybody. And I want to hear your perspective on this.
Oh boy.
Why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, is so hard to solve for?
I think part of it, especially now too, is we talked about affordable housing. While it's very steady, it is not as enticing to investors sometimes, right? Especially big corporation where they're just like, well, instead of making money on affordable housing, I can literally make money on midterm rentals or short term, whatever it is. And so for them, this is like, I think when it comes to cash flow, it might not be as enticing on their end when they're looking at it, because at the end of the day, it's big corporations and whoever that developers, sometimes they just look at it in that front and they're like, oh, we prefer to, we'll try to maximize our investment type of thing. But I think also at the same time too, it could be because maybe again, I think we talked about all the myth, right? Where it's just like, when you think of like affordable housing, you think of like poor, crime, just all the bad things that goes with it. And so I would assume that like, then all of a sudden, when you put a bunch of people together, they're like, no, we don't want this in our community and whatnot, because it might lower down our, I don't know, the value of our property and whatnot. And so for me, it's just, I'm like, well, look at Dorchester. I'm like, if anything, you can't even afford it at this point. And there's a lot of affordable housing, but unfortunately, it's more of like, we don't have enough space.
Yeah, I love your answer there, Lilly, because I think your first point about profitability, I hope we were able to debunk that myth, right? We saw Lilly's example today. We heard her story about one, how she has peace of mind, but also she's able to make a spread on it while helping out a family. And she has that peace of mind from the stable rent that's coming from the government every single month. And she has helped to just debunk some of the myths associated with affordable housing, right? It's not just all guns, drugs, and drama. She has amazing tenants who treats her property with respect. So, Lilly, again, I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful you came onto the podcast today. I'm so grateful that you spent an hour of your time today to share your stories, to debunk all these myths. Guys, please make sure you follow Lilly. Please reach out to her. Please engage her for any transaction coordination services. Please reach out to her if you have questions about her experience with Section 8, because don't just listen to me. Listen to all the other guests that have come onto this podcast that have shared their experience on how to be successful in this, right? You don't have to be so fearful. Sometimes we hear these myths and they're meant to scare us. right? On the news is mostly negative news, but you have people who are a light, who shines a light into this world, just like Lilly, who came on and shared their stories. So Lilly, thank you so much again for coming onto the podcast.
No, thank you, Kent, for having me. I really appreciate you and your friendship and just having me on your podcast.
Well, this has been fun. Lilly, maybe we'll have you back on the podcast in like a year because I would love to hear more stories as you acquire more and more property.
I should have more stories for you in a year.
Yeah, I can't wait. All right, and we are out.